let's go ahead. So this is moving CS under the CRO and navigating change. And sometimes that can be a little scary for folks. So we like to sort of dig in and talk about it. All right. So who is the CRO first? And I oftentimes you can see a CRO have responsibility over marketing and sales, or sales and customer success, all things post-sales, or just sales and some portions of CS, maybe not the operational parts, but the revenue parts, or all three, like marketing, sales, and CS. But how would you characterize or define a CRO, JB?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. It depends on your organization in terms of how they set up. I think about it in terms of go to market, right? And sometimes your CRO, in my case, the CRO even owns the go to market strategy. So there's some debate about whether that belongs with the CEO or the CRO. But those go to market functions, many times there's crossover or very strong dotted lines to product as well. With the CRO kind of role.
Yep. And
is anybody here a CRO, by the way? Just by show of hands, do we have any CROs? I mean, I know they probably don't frequent. I'm assuming they don't frequent SuccessHour, but okay, just curious.
And Linda, you just put a comment in sometimes PL. When you say PL, what do you mean by PL?
Professional learning or anything like that, extended services, contracts, things like that. I came from ed tech, and so PL was part of that.
Oh, yeah, like professional service. So when you say professional learning, you don't mean internally, you mean professional services.
Yes.
Org. Yeah.
Okay.
Paid
so
webinars, paid on-sites, paid things like that.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so professional services also might be, if you're more tech heavy, might be implementation if you're selling in professional services, things like that. Yep. Yep, absolutely. And so, but basically what the idea is, the difference between, say, if you were a VP of sales or a VP of CS or a VP of marketing, and any one of those roles can come into the role of CRO, is instead you're really looking at across the board what's happening with revenue and what's happening with that revenue flow. And so that's kind of why then that title came about, right? Now, when organizations move to have CS coming under a CRO, it oftentimes can be because they're looking to have revenue accountability, right? And so if you are not, if you were not a CS team focused on revenue, that might be a big change that happens where now you're focused on revenue. And do you want to mention anything else, JB, about that? Like, did you see big changes in your own organization when you started to lead both teams?
I mean, yeah, there were definitely changes, but I think specifically revenue accountability, yes, but why revenue accountability now? And the short version of that story is that growth can mask churn problems, right? When there's rapid growth, you can have net retention numbers that might be ignoring the gross churn numbers, and that might be okay for a season because the growth is outpacing the churn. But then all of a sudden, when you're in a different, macroeconomic climate and things start to tighten, it's like, oh, wait a minute, we need to be looking at this. I think there are just some seasonal things that are, some economic, factors that are impacting this shift right now as well. That's kind of why the revenue accountability, in my opinion.
Yep. And the other thing I was going to say too is that it almost went fleeting, like right in and out. But so I'll come back to it. Sorry. But when you think about sort of the pros and cons for it, then if your organization it needs to focus on revenue. Oh, I know. I was thinking about metrics. So if you're thinking about, if NRR can mask, right? Your expansion can mask your retention numbers if you're using NRR. Sometimes what organizations will also do is start focusing on the GRR number metric instead of NRR, because GRR doesn't measure the revenue, like the expansion growth. It's just looking at retention, right? So that might be another way, or another metric that goes along with this, or something, if your organization especially is doing it for some particular reason. Sometimes it's just to create alignment, right? If you feel like, there's a lot of silos and separate camps, by putting everything under one person that's accountable across the board, then they start to feel a little differently about it sometimes, right? Sometimes though, if somebody is coming up from another part of the organization or from a different background than CS, and they don't understand this post-sales motion, what you may find is that in terms of the cons, that you're having to explain kind of what you're doing in post-sales. They may try to, like, I actually had to go into an organization as a consultant once and sort of take apart all the sales sort of imposed processes that were put on post-sales, because they were almost behaving like SDRs and doing cold calls to the customers to try to get them to expand business, as opposed to it being relationship building and expanding business more naturally, right? By understanding kind of who was ready for it. And it was burning bridges in a sense, whereas people didn't want to talk to the CSM because the CSM was basically cold calling them instead of actually helping them be successful, right? So you can see sometimes that you may need to educate your new CRO leader to help them understand some of the motions that need to take place in the post-sales motion. I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to speak to that, or JB, if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I think, ideally customer success is the business. So your very best CROs are going to care about revenue beyond this quarter or this month, right? They really do care about the recurring revenue. They understand the impact that NRR and GRR have on the valuation of the company and the resources available to the company. And it's where the business happens. So when you get the right CRO in place, it can have an awesome
Sure.
long-term impact on customer success and ultimately the business's success. So I think it can be a really good thing. Good CROs are not like VPs of sales trying to eke out the quarter, right? They have a longer term. They are trying to hit the quarter, don't get me wrong, but they have a longer term look at the health and the value of the business. So
Right. Randy.
In regards to CR role, how I guess are companies adopting that role more prominently recently, or has it been something that's been there and maybe it's just a renaming of a role in a different way, or what's kind of the evolution of that?
CRO as a title has been around for a while. And I certainly, before the change in the shifting economics that we've seen since 2022, certainly there were times when CS would be put under the CRO in the past. But I think there was sort of an uptick when there was a consolidation of teams and people, where we did see a lot of CS teams, if they stuck around, then they started getting more officially sort of revenue responsibility and being put under the CRO in that process. I know I've seen a lot of that. I don't know if others have experienced some of that. If anybody wants to weigh in, but and then oh, okay, yeah, so the CFO is going to have financial responsibility, like they're actually under the CFO, just sort of responding to a question in the chat. So the difference between a CFO and a CRO, the CRO is going to be more responsible for go-to-market, like marketing, sales, CS. You're looking at sort of the incoming revenue that's coming from customers. How do you go to market, right? And so sometimes that could be called the chief growth officer, seen that too. It'll be called that. Whereas as chief financial officer is literally responsible for everything that's billing, as well as all of the financial reporting for an organization, right?
Yeah,
So
another way you could look at it if you wanted to, it's not truly this binary, but a CFO is going to look at what happened, and a CRO needs to look at what needs to happen, right? So future or proactive from a go-to-market strategy, how are we setting the goals? Like, I'm going to work with the CFO to set the goals, but I'm the one that's responsible to hit those goals, to set those goals, and then the CFO is going to look at how are we doing, right? What happened in a more reactive stance. It's not truly that binary. Really, when you have a great relationship, both should happen, but
yeah.
both are involved on both sides.
But the teams that would report to a CFO are going to be like accounting, billing. They're going to be doing financial reporting and projections across the whole organization. Whereas a CRO is really focused on bringing new business in, and then what happens to that revenue with the existing customers. Yeah. And Kevin, I'm just checking, you're not on mute, and that's totally fine. But if you wanted to weigh in, I'm giving you the option.
I'm good. Thank you, though.
Okay.
I'm loving this conversation.
Oh, cool. Awesome. All right. So then navigating change, a lot of times then what will happen is if you've been a CS team and you haven't had revenue responsibility, then that is a whole new language you're trying to learn. And that is kind of the point of when you consolidate teams together to create that alignment, right? Is to get marketing and sales and CS starting to talk in each other's love languages, as I think, Bob London would probably call it, right? But you want to start talking in some of the same, like thinking about your customer going all the way through, and talking about what sort of revenue is being generated and projected, right? But there can be a lot of change management involved in that. And that's why you'll see in some of the slides, if you go to the end, if anybody was around last summer, you'll see that some of these things are here at the end, where we're talking about how change is emotional and what happens when our brain is going through change, right? And all of the various types of emotions involved. This, if you're reporting under a CRO, there could be some really big changes happening, right? And so you might be in a long and intense set of change, or it could be a quick hike up a steep hill type of change, but chances are it's not a pebble type of change. So when you're feeling all of those feels, it's because there's a lot of change going on. So we wanted to be sure to mention that in the resources. But let's see, and where are we here? What are some other things that come up, Jonathan, when you were moving over from a CCO to a CRO, going the opposite way? I'm sure that there was a lot you were looking at as opportunities, and also change that you were navigating. And I know that some of what we were talking about here on this page is in relation to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Connecting, ideally, it would be awesome if sales and CS are really connected. And I think when we make these kinds of moves, it has the potential to create some pretty amazing alignment between our business units, right? So, for example, cross-training. So, one of the things that happened between our customer success and our sales team was, if my CSMs wanted to improve their expansion numbers, why don't we invite some of our trusted AEs in to do some training for us on how we can better position that expansion, opportunity, for example. And what happens is we start to build trust and relationship across those walls. We foster some familiarity, and it helps just in terms of being able to work together, work collaboratively on some of those things, and then vice versa as well, right? I mean, I would have my AEC say, "Gosh, onboarding and implementation has evolved so much in the last year. What can you help me better understand so that when I'm talking to a prospect, I know how to set this up, right?" So we might, show them how we're making enhancements and actually run training for the AEs on some of this stuff. So have an onboarding specialist or an implementation specialist come in and have that kind of conversation as well. So cross training, I think, is one of those opportunities for connection.
And so you would say that like it's really an opportunity for it to go both ways then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When it's done well, I think it should be. I think it needs to. So.
Yeah, right. And I've seen some questions in the chat, and I was just going to respond to a couple of them. Mary Beth, you were asking for commercial CSM roles, if you see it often in certain industries or size of companies. I don't know if well, two things. I would say fintech, it's oftentimes there's commercial CSMs because it's related, just the nature of the product, it's more related. And so you often see commercial CSMs. Health tech, oftentimes they have regulations where they're not allowed to speak about revenue and things like that. So they're often regulated and it's not even an option. Not exclusively, but just if you're going to talk about generally for either of those. And then otherwise, I would say that once you get up to, say, $100 million organizations, that have 100 million ARR in revenue a year, you tend to see where like renewals managers are separated out, and things like that. Also, if you're looking specifically for a commercial CSM role, sometimes they'll call those account managers. And you might still have responsibility for the account relationship, but also responsibility for generating revenue and doing the contracts. So that's just some like general things you can go by, but there's no real hard and fast rule, I'd say. And then I think there was one other question that came up earlier, Lapika, for OKRs. I would generally say that when you're looking at OKRs, if you're looking at quotas in the post-sales motion, that's most successful if you have thousands of customers, because then sort of on average, odds are this is what you should try to go to, and this would, that's when you can make up the difference. But if that's the case, you're probably doing a more low touch, as opposed to high touch motion with that. When you're doing a high touch motion and you only have a handful of accounts, usually you don't want to do quotas so much as projections is what I'd say, or else you end up trying to pressure them into buying something to meet your quarterly needs as opposed to what their actual needs are. Just, I don't know, JB, is there anything you would add to some of those?
Yeah, I mean, at a basic level, for me, I'm looking daily at retention and expansion against the projection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we behind, ahead or behind of that? Because that all feeds into, the annual recurring revenue against the goals that the company is trying to drive. So,
right.
yeah.
And otherwise trying to look ahead for that, as opposed, what you're projecting, a quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarters out, as opposed to what's happening this month, this quarter, because that's probably already baked. Yeah. Trevor, did you have a thought or question?
Yeah, a lot of the sessions we've been having lately, including this one, keep coming back to how there's a shift now to try to attach CS to revenue. And it sounds like in that sense that it's only a somewhat recent phenomenon. I mean, obviously some people have been doing it forever, but why would this not have been something that people were always doing? Because it seems like it's a bit of a no-brainer, at least in terms of job security for CS people, as well as creating alignment across the different business departments. So why is it only now that this is starting to happen more often?
I think we both have opinions on that. JB, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, there would be several reasons, right? I'll offer one, which is that depending on when you were building your software company, your customer success department might have actually been birthed out of customer support, and customer support and the connection to, that post-sale activity might have more traditionally been, kind of at a different place from an accounting standpoint than growth and revenue. And so, in some organizations that I was a part of, customer success grew up as part of the support organization, or even grew out of the support organization. So what seems the hindsight gives us the 2020, Trevor. So,
Yeah. And then also with the shifting economics, that's why it's become, I think, more important. Because now that companies are not growing at any cost, because there was a point during the peak of the bubble when there was so much money you could just throw people at things, when it became important for companies to be both profitable and grow, then they started to do some cuts. And in some cases, they even put new sales under CS because there was limited sales that could be done anyway. There's a whole number of different types of reactions that have been done. And that gets into, and if anybody wants to download, I have a free guide about post-sales revenue leadership. And I kind of go through and talk about how there's, basically when you get to profitability, you're looking at revenue coming in, and then you have minus COGS, and then that gets to your profitability. And if CS is anything post-sales that isn't attached to revenue is part of COGS, so that takes away from your profitability. So that's another reason for it as well. Allison, and then we're going to finish up and go to breakout rooms.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about his question of the kind of shift to CRO and sales. Multiple jobs that I've seen, and a few that I've interviewed for are all base OTE, which I've never seen before. When I started looking like a couple of years ago, when I was thinking about making a
Do you
shift.
want to explain OTE for everybody?
Yeah, so other sorry, I'm kind of new to it too. Other something earnings. Right? Am I correct? Can you help me out on that T?
I think so, yeah.
On target earnings, right?
Thank you. On target. It's not other, on target earnings. Essentially
There we go.
commissions, right?
Yeah. Right.
Right.
So it has variable pay as well as
Yes, yeah. Which is something I'd never seen. So that I don't know if that's a signal to the change as well, but
yeah, if you have having variable, if you have revenue responsibility, they usually put in some sort of variable to incentivize you to work towards that revenue responsibility. Yep, exactly that. And okay, so then that gets into shared variable comp models right there. JV, what were you going to mention about that?
yeah, I think I like having skin in the game, and I liked working on comp models that allowed both sales and CS to participate in the work that they were doing, especially the collaborative work that they were doing. And I think and it's also one of the best ways that I could get my CSMs paid what I believe they were deserving of. Right. I mean, how many times, if you were in the business 5 years ago, the conversation was, oh my gosh, look at all the work and value CSMs provide, yet AEs are getting paid 3 times as much money. What the heck? Right. And so we had to do this work to push our CSMs into these 6-figure, for me to be able to pay my CSM 150 grand, I had to build variable comp models, and shared variable comp models can create really interesting opportunity for alignment against goals. So it's a sticky subject. Not everybody sees it the way that I do. And it's complicated. It's complicated to put together variable comp models that work well for everybody involved. But if in my mind, it's worth the battle.
Yeah, and it's really about incentivizing that cooperation across the whole customer journey, essentially, right? And that's where you're getting into another thing that might be different is then at the CS leader, certainly, and sometimes CSMs start paying attention to the pipeline, and as well as then what happens with voice of the customer meetings, right? because then, and we had our pipeline session a few weeks ago where we're talking about, how do you track and project the revenue, the post-sales revenue, the pipeline, right? And that is something then, because it becomes part of then when you're under a CRO, then you're looking at the whole pipeline. You're looking at that marketing pipeline going into sales, and then what is happening then, like if you think of it on sideways, I guess there's also the bow tie model, right? Where you see marketing coming into sales, and then also then how you come out and you're growing that revenue. Right. And so you're looking at that pipeline along the way. So that might be a new motion for some CS leaders, but certainly something you would expect if you're going to be reporting to the CRO. And then also across all of the teams, looking at go-to-market alignment, as I think we've been mentioning, and how that impacts the product as well, and having some alignment in terms of what your priorities are when you're all coming together in a unified way to speak to product about what your goals are and what you need on the roadmap. JB, anything you want to add as we go to breakout questions?
Totally. I totally agree. I don't know how many of you, has anybody here been in a pipeline meeting?
No,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
happening.
Good.
All right. So yeah, so it is interesting when, we were at a scale where I could have AEs and CSMs in the same pipeline meeting, which was kind of interesting, because as soon as they started to bump up against, likelihood to convert, for example, an AE would throw something over the fence like, oh, you know what? Let me talk to Carrie, or the CSM would be like, oh gosh, I should, and that was interesting, that if you're at the scale where you can do that, and it makes sense to do that, and it doesn't make sense for everybody. I just had a small enough number of people that I could do it that way. But I really liked the synergy that it created. So
Cool. All right. So the breakout questions, you see them here. Reminder that you want to do a lightning round of intros. Can always share LinkedIn and connect during the week after on Slack. But want to be sure that we get this discussion going too. We let this go way over. I'm sorry. I keep doing that these days, but I just reposted the session notes. Be sure to download that and the slides. Everybody have it as we go to breakout. How did it go?
It's all right.
Good. Yeah.
We talked about some harder topics related to all this.
Any aha moments that somebody wants to share?
Well, I was just talking about the fact that when I read those questions, the first thing I thought was, this is why I got laid off. Because there was no connection to sales. Sales would hand off to CS, and we just kind of start from square one and try to figure out what's going on. Never in any conversations about pipeline. I was telling my group that we started this mentoring group in my company where they put client-facing people in front of anybody that wanted to talk to a client. So you could try to bring somebody into a client meeting if they wanted to learn something about, client-facing work. So this person in the UK wanted to join my calls, and we had trouble getting her on the calls because of time differences and things. But she said, never mind, Dill. What I really want to know is, why is your product line the only one that doesn't allow us to get revenue? Somehow we can never pull revenue out of I was in customer data platform. We couldn't get revenue from customer data platform clients. That was my first aha moment, where I realized that everybody else is making money except for us.
Yeah.
Bad place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've changed jobs before because of that. And I guess technically you have too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what happens too, when you, especially like when everything's good and money's flowing in from investors, then you can afford to have, whole teams and product lines that are not profitable. But once you have to be profitable as a business, either because investors aren't throwing money in anymore and you have a limited runway, or because investors are asking like, hey, what's your profitability? They might just have to respond to it. And maybe it's not so much of a runway issue. Still, they are responding to that investor pressure, right? And so they're going to start looking at that. So it's a great way to understand it. Again, I have that free guide that's over on my website. If you want to take a look at it, it might give you a couple aha
I've been reading
moments.
it. Yes.
Oh, good. Good. Excellent.
Thank you.
Allison, what sort of aha moments came up for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we had a really spirited conversation in our group. I was with Jillian, Kathy, Randall, and Kevin, talking specifically around CSMs wanting to have a number, wanting to, take on that component of the sale of the business and then being rewarded with it, with a number or commission. And it was kind of interesting because I come from a background where I did not have that as part of my salary package, but I felt a very big responsibility when things were not going to come through. Even though I wasn't getting paid on it, it was still like, and they were pretty big deals, but I felt, kind of like it was my responsibility as well. It wasn't going to be something that like, sales were the, fire you, whatever. But it was definitely something that was in my performance. So Kevin kind of made a good point that if that's the case, wouldn't you want to make sure that, you were aligned and, having some revenue or, you were getting paid for that as well. And then there were some other questions around, well, should CSMs, get blamed if that doesn't come through? What's that like? And just kind of talking out the different kind of scenarios that people have had as CSMs and, the salary. So it was a really good conversation. And I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are, JB and Jan, about the pay structure of OTE. Does that make us as a CSM more sticky, if you will, not cogs? I'm really interested in that because obviously I don't want to be in this situation again. And I want to feel like I have a little control over that in my next role, which will be an individual contributor. So a lot of these things I'm learning, I feel like I'm not necessarily going to be able to apply to my next position, but I'm just kind of interested in your thoughts on that, maybe for a later conversation.
In the interview process, you can definitely ask, is your CS team or your CSMs, are they considered COGS or are they considered OPEX, or sometimes they refer to it as SG&A. So you can ask that as a question and find out if the CS leader knows. They may or may not know.
I don't think the company knew. Like, I think it was like, well, maybe we're deciding on that.
Someone in the company knows. And
Yeah,
if you know
right.
enough to ask the question,
Yeah.
that might be an aha moment for the hiring manager too.
Yeah.
JB, was there anything you wanted to say in response to that, or?
We chatted in our group a little bit, like, every organization is probably going to be a little bit different. So it makes sense to ask the question. I'm more a fan of goals for customer success professionals than quotas, right? Goals mean a variable comp where you have, earning potential, but I'm not putting you on corrective action or walking you out the door if you don't hit the number, for the first quarter or whatever, right? So there are different ways that you can do it. And so just asking those questions around, like, are we talking about kind of goals, targets? Is there a variable comp model? Are there quotas? Because some, there are members here who have had quotas on CSMs as well. And so it depends, the answer is it depends on how the organization is setting it up, I think.
Yeah, I only favor quotas if there's thousands of customers again. Otherwise, I would want to know that there's projections and that sort of thing. Gordana in the chat makes a comment that I think is really interesting because be careful what you wish for. The grass is not always greener, right? Salespeople do get laid off all the time, and they can get they have quotas, which is makes sense because you have the whole marketplace. But at the same time, is it really reasonable if you haven't generated a pipeline that through marketing and other motions that are or if the marketplace is actually going through a downturn? If say all of your potential customers are in tech and tech is going through a downturn, then their quotas might be such that it doesn't work for you, it can work against you, right? But that said, it's still, I think, positive if to be associated with revenue, but how is the organization handling it? There was somebody raising their hand and it just went down and I missed them. Who was that? Was it Nada? Oh, Nada, what were you going to mention?
Yes, it was already mentioned by Jonathan. So I'm transitioning to customer success. I'm fairly new. And it was very interesting because we brought up the topic of the sales quotas and CSMs being trusted advisors. And you know, I took some notes, and it was mentioned that it's important to ask whether or not, if there are quotas, then, perhaps the CSM that's, applying for that company should reconsider working there, because it's a question of culture. If you're not a trusted advisor at a company, then it's potentially probably not a good company. Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would say, like, take that with a grain of salt, but definitely consider that when a candidate should consider that when applying at a company, when they have
Sure.
when the CSM, when there's quotas, and I'm paraphrasing what I wrote,
Right,
but
right.
when the CSMs have hard quotas to meet and they're no longer the trusted advisor, one of in my group, someone brought up the point that people only buy from you when they trust. When
Yep.
there's that trust. Thus the trusted advisor part is amplified even more. So that was my
Yeah. Well, and I would say to that, Nita, that certainly people only buy from you if they trust you. And that's where then the quota system could start to break that down, as opposed to projections, which is, I think, what JB was just trying to say about having goals or projections as opposed to quotas. That it might be a sign of an organization that, so if they say that there are quotas, you might say, oh, and are all of your CSMs meeting those quotas? What does that quota system look like? How many on a customer base of what? How are you basing those quotas? I would want to dig into those types of questions, because quotas can often not be as successful with the post-sales team. If it's a smaller customer base, think about that. Like, well, I've got to get 10 sales. And if you only have 7 customers that really need it, and you're trying to sell it in to 3 of your customers that don't need it because you're trying to make your quota, then that's where you would start to erode that trust, because you're doing it for your reasons and your company reasons and not for their reasons. So yeah, exactly that. Trevor, and then we'll probably call it a night since we've gone 10 minutes over. I really appreciate people sticking around. All right, Trevor?
Yeah, in my group, we had some of us had better relations with our sales team than others. I know for some of us, and for instance me, like, they saw CS sort of activities as almost like a pulling away of their sort of domain of working with customers and having their account management relationships. But the thing that I want to bring up, the conversation kind of more broadly open with my group, was that the sales and CS sort of tie to revenue, and even the way that the metrics are done, or the on-target earnings, or whatever you want to call it, is so dependent on the company. And we talked a lot about how there is such a dependency on the company and not as much of a standardization, which then opened up a lot of the questions that I think a lot of the sessions for the past few months we've been doing dance around, but we haven't said it, which is, I think there's a question being asked that people don't want to admit is being asked by a lot of companies and a lot of leadership, is whether or not CS is worth the time. And they're trying to figure out where to sort of align it in the business to make it possible to prove that, yes, it is worth the time, whether that's putting it under revenue. We had some people in our group say that it was actually under marketing, or it was under operations, or it was under something else. And I think it's hard to predict how the role is going to change, because I think there's so many different variables right now, especially with things like AI and all this other stuff. It's hard to know how CS is going to align itself with the business goals at the end of the day, in whatever way that they decide, or if it's going to be morphed into some sort of other position where, I don't know, it's a combination of things. I'm rambling a bit, but my point here is that it seems like everything is kind of in flux in terms of how to prove the worth.
I think there is a lot of change that's going on in the profession, certainly. And I think there's also a lot of change just going on in tech right now, right? with AI, with the way that the shifting economics have started to impact. I don't think that we're going to see a growth at any cost moment again for some time, because that really requires a lot of influx of cash and a lot of VC organizations that frankly, there's fewer VCs around now than there were even, 18 months ago, right? Just less cash that's available for startups than there were. When you take a look at how, anyway, there's a lot of different movements in cash markets and things like that overall. So, that has an impact then on startups and how startups work. So it's something to be aware of. And then what sort of pressures are on corporations. And that really, what that means is that as CS leaders and as CSMs, we need to start thinking of ourselves as business leaders. That's really what it comes down to, and understanding the language of business. And the more we understand that, the more we are empowered in our roles for our own careers, for how we help our customers, and then also how we help our companies. So, hopefully this conversation, has resonated in that respect, and we'll, continue to talk about these things. JB, any last things you want to say as we say so long?
Such a fun conversation, you all. I posted this in chat, but if you had a question that I didn't get to, just ping me on LinkedIn and we'll go throw some time on the calendar. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. So we're all asking, I think, good questions. So it's an important topic. It's one to remain compassionately curious about. And yeah, we're humans don't like change. So if you find yourself in change, like, that's okay. It's okay that you don't like it. It's so normal and human and natural to not like that it's changing. So, but get curious, ask some questions, connect with other people, who can share some experience along the way, and you get to make a decision. You get to make a decision about where you want to work and what kind of role you want to have and what you want to do with your career. So, hopefully that's empowering to you all. Honor to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you. And next week we're meeting at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, 4 p.m. GMT. It's a different time. We're going to do that again on May 2nd. So I just want everyone to know it's going to be earlier time. And we're going to be meeting up with Carly Agar again, and we're going to be talking about goal trees. That was sort of a sidebar topic from when she was here back in January. And we're going to double click on that and dig in on goal trees. Okay. Excellent. Hope you all can make it. Spread the word. All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.